At 3:47 a.m. on March 15, 2019, Dr. Michael Harrison loaded the final boxes of OxyContin into an ambulance in the underground garage of St. Vincent's Hospital. This wasn't ordinary medical transport. This was a mobile pharmacy worth $2.3 million. Behind the wheel sat his accomplice, disguised in paramedic uniform. In the back of the ambulance, hidden in secret compartments beneath medical equipment, lay 50,000 opioid pills, enough to supply half of Los Angeles with narcotics. But Dr. Harrison didn't know one crucial thing. DEA agents had already surrounded the hospital building. They had information from an informant. Operation White Coat was supposed to end exactly this night. The respected cardiac surgeon had no idea that his 3-year empire, which had generated over $50 million in total profits, was about to crumble in the next 5 minutes. Wait, hold on. Before I tell you how a respected cardiac surgeon transformed into one of the largest drug suppliers on the West Coast, do me a small favor. Hit the like button on this video and subscribe to the channel. It really helps us make these investigations. And definitely write in the comments what city you're watching from, because this story affected people across America, and it's interesting to know where our audience is located. When the ambulance pulled out of St. Vincent's Hospital underground garage, Dr. Harrison thought he was executing another perfect operation. Over 3 years, he had built an empire that brought him over $50 million in total profits, more than some established criminal organizations earned. His operation was so sophisticated that it operated right under the DEA's nose, using the medical system itself as the perfect cover. But at 3:52 a.m., everything changed. The ambulance was stopped at the very first traffic light. DEA agents in bulletproof vests surrounded the vehicle with weapons drawn. Special Agent Mark Thompson, who had been hunting Harrison for 8 months, finally had his target. Harrison's hands trembled as he watched armed federal agents surround the ambulance. Inside the hidden compartments, 50,000 pills worth millions on the street sat waiting to be discovered. Wait, hold up, because what they found in that ambulance was only the tip of the iceberg. Dr. Harrison's real operation was 100 times larger than what that single vehicle contained. Dr. Michael Harrison wasn't your typical criminal. At 42, he was one of California's most respected cardiac surgeons, a Harvard graduate who had performed over 2,000 successful heart surgeries. His colleagues knew him as a brilliant physician whose groundbreaking procedures had been featured in medical journals. But behind this perfect facade, Harrison was drowning in debt. A bitter divorce had destroyed his finances. Despite earning $400,000 annually, his lifestyle demanded $700,000. Alimony cost $15,000 monthly. His Beverly Hills mansion mortgage required $8,000. Private school for 2 children cost another $8,000 monthly. Luxury cars, country clubs, and status symbols added $6,000 more. Credit card debts had reached $200,000. He'd taken a second mortgage and was considering selling his practice. The psychological pressure was crushing. Financial ruin threatened to destroy everything he'd built. That's when Harrison noticed something that would change everything. Working at St. Vincent's Hospital, Harrison had unlimited access to massive quantities of prescription painkillers. The cardiac unit maintained huge inventories of OxyContin, Vicodin, morphine, and fentanyl, pharmaceutical-grade narcotics from companies like Purdue Pharma and Johnson & Johnson. On the black market, these commanded astronomical prices. A single 80-milligram OxyContin pill sold for $60 to $100 on the street. Harrison calculated that his department used 500 OxyContin pills weekly, worth over $40,000. Vicodin added another $20,000 in weekly street value. The security surrounding these medications was surprisingly lax. As a senior surgeon with impeccable credentials, Harrison had broad access to the hospital's pharmaceutical supplies. The inventory management system relied heavily on trust and professional reputation rather than rigorous oversight. The first theft was almost accidental, but it opened Harrison's eyes to the incredible opportunity that surrounded him every day. A post-surgery patient named Robert Chen refused the prescribed OxyContin regimen, claiming he preferred to manage pain through meditation and natural methods. Instead of returning the unused medication to the pharmacy according to standard protocol, Harrison pocketed the entire bottle. That bottle contained 60 pills with a combined street value of nearly $5,000. Harrison held the bottle in his hands, realizing that this single container contained more money than many people earned in a month. The temptation was overwhelming, but Harrison was also terrified of the consequences if he was caught stealing narcotics. That night, Harrison sat in his Beverly Hills mansion, staring at the bottle of pills and wrestling with a decision that would change his life forever. He calculated that if he could divert just 10 bottles per month through similar methods, he could earn $50,000, enough to cover his alimony and mortgage payments while maintaining his surgical practice. But Harrison was too intelligent to rely on random opportunities. If he was going to enter the drug business, he needed a systematic approach that would minimize his risk of detection while maximizing his profits. But wait, because what Harrison did next was both brilliant and terrifying. Harrison spent weeks studying the hospital's pharmaceutical distribution system, looking for weaknesses that he could exploit. He discovered that the inventory management relied on outdated computer systems and manual record-keeping that made it difficult to track individual pills accurately. The hospital ordered narcotics from pharmaceutical companies in large quantities, then distributed them to various departments based on projected needs. Each department maintained its own inventory, with periodic audits that were often superficial and rarely identified small discrepancies. Harrison realized that if he could manipulate the computer records and create false documentation for legitimate-seeming prescriptions, he could steal substantial quantities of narcotics without triggering the audit systems. The key was to make the thefts appear to be legitimate medical uses rather than criminal diversions. He began with small experiments, creating false prescriptions for non-existent patients using stolen Social Security numbers and fabricated medical histories. The hospital's computer system allowed him to generate prescription orders without additional verification from other medical staff. After all, he was a respected surgeon with 15 years of unblemished service. During his first month of systematic theft, Harrison stole medications worth $12,000 on the street. He was careful to vary his methods, sometimes creating false patients, sometimes claiming that real patients required additional pain management, and occasionally reporting that prescribed medications had been accidentally damaged or lost. The profits were intoxicating. During the second month, Harrison earned $25,000. By the third month, he was generating over $40,000 monthly from his pharmaceutical thefts. The money flowed like water, and nobody suspected anything. Harrison's reputation as a dedicated surgeon provided perfect cover for his criminal activities. But Harrison quickly realized that operating alone would severely limit his potential profits. The quantities he could steal personally were constrained by his need to maintain plausible medical justifications for the prescriptions. If he wanted to build a truly profitable operation, he needed accomplices who had access to different parts of the hospital's supply chain. Harrison began carefully recruiting accomplices from within the medical system, targeting individuals who had financial problems and would be motivated to participate in his scheme. He was extremely selective, choosing people who were desperate enough to take risks, but smart enough to follow his instructions precisely. The first recruit was Sarah Connolly, a veteran nurse who had worked in the cardiology department for 8 years. Connolly was 41 years old, divorced, and struggling to support 2 teenage children on her nursing salary. Her ex-husband had been laid off from his construction job and was months behind on child support payments. Connolly was facing foreclosure on her modest home in Glendale and had already borrowed money from her retirement account to pay essential bills. Harrison approached Connolly carefully, initially offering her a few $100s to overlook certain irregularities in medication counts. He presented it as a temporary arrangement to help her through a financial crisis, emphasizing that no patients would be harmed and that they were simply redistributing excess medications that would otherwise be wasted. Connolly was initially reluctant, but her financial desperation eventually overcame her ethical concerns. She agreed to help Harrison by falsifying medication administration records and providing him with access to secure storage areas where narcotics were kept between patient doses. The second recruit was James Rodriguez, a pharmacist who managed the hospital's central medication inventory. Rodriguez was 38 years old and had been working at St. Vincent's for 12 years. Despite his advanced education and significant responsibilities, Rodriguez earned only $65,000 annually, far less than the doctors he served daily. Rodriguez was bitter about the salary disparity between pharmacists and physicians. He watched surgeons like Harrison earn 10 times his salary while he handled the complex technical work of medication management. Harrison exploited this resentment, convincing Rodriguez that they were simply redistributing wealth from the bloated medical system to people who actually needed the money. Rodriguez's role was crucial because he controlled the hospital's entire pharmaceutical inventory. He could manipulate computer records to hide stolen medications and could provide Harrison with detailed information about audit schedules and security procedures. The third key member of the team was Tommy Vasquez, a 45-year-old ambulance driver who had been working for the hospital's emergency medical services for 12 years. Vasquez had access to ambulances and could transport materials throughout Los Angeles without attracting police attention. Medical vehicles are rarely stopped or searched, making them perfect for moving large quantities of narcotics. Harrison told Vasquez that they were conducting a private medical research project that required discretion due to competitive concerns with other hospitals. Vasquez believed he was helping with legitimate medical research and had no idea he was participating in a massive drug trafficking operation. Each team member believed they were participating in a small-scale operation that would last only a few months. None of them understood the true scope of what Harrison was planning to build. Wait, this isn't even the craziest part, because Harrison found a way to do this right under the DEA's nose. Harrison's scheme became increasingly sophisticated as he learned from experience and adapted to the hospital's security measures. He created an elaborate system that exploited every weakness in the institution's pharmaceutical controls while maintaining the appearance of legitimate medical practice. The foundation of the operation was Harrison's creation of false patient identities using stolen social security numbers and fabricated medical histories. Harrison obtained social security numbers from obituaries, homeless individuals, and undocumented immigrants who were unlikely to have their identities monitored by authorities. Using these stolen identities, Harrison created comprehensive medical records in the hospital's computer system. These phantom patients had complete medical histories, including previous surgeries, chronic conditions, and medication allergies. The records were so detailed and professionally constructed that they appeared completely legitimate to anyone who reviewed them. Harrison then documented fictional surgical procedures for these non-existent patients. Since cardiac surgery typically requires powerful painkillers for post-operative recovery, Harrison could justify prescribing large quantities of opioids without raising suspicions among other medical staff. The computer records showed that these patients had undergone legitimate procedures that medically warranted substantial pain management. The prescriptions generated by these false records were filled through the hospital's internal pharmacy system, with Rodriguez ensuring that the medications were properly processed and that inventory records were adjusted to reflect the legitimate medical use. To anyone reviewing the records, it appeared that Dr. Harrison was simply providing appropriate post-operative care to his patients. But Harrison needed distribution channels to convert the stolen medications into cash. He established relationships with 12 different pharmacies throughout the Los Angeles metropolitan area, each operated by pharmacists who were willing to fill questionable prescriptions in exchange for substantial cash payments. These pharmacies received modest orders that appeared routine and medically justified. Harrison was careful to ensure that no single pharmacy saw enough volume to raise suspicions about his prescribing patterns. The prescriptions were distributed across multiple locations and were filled during different shifts to avoid creating obvious patterns. Harrison also cultivated relationships with street-level dealers who purchased the medications from him at wholesale prices and then sold them to individual users at full retail value. These dealers operated in different neighborhoods throughout Los Angeles, ensuring that Harrison's operation didn't create obvious concentrations of pharmaceutical drugs in any single area. The genius of Harrison's distribution system was its use of ambulances as mobile drug transport vehicles. Medical vehicles responding to emergency calls are among the last vehicles that law enforcement would suspect of drug trafficking. Ambulances have legitimate reasons to carry large quantities of medications and medical equipment, providing perfect concealment for hidden compartments, storing thousands of pills. Tommy Vasquez modified several ambulances with sophisticated hidden compartments that were virtually undetectable during routine inspections. These compartments were built into the floor panels, equipment storage areas, and even inside medical devices themselves. The modifications were so professional that they appeared to be original manufacturing features. Harrison even organized charitable medical missions to poor neighborhoods throughout Los Angeles, where his team distributed free medications to residents with chronic pain conditions. To outside observers, These appeared to be humanitarian efforts that demonstrated Harrison's commitment to serving underserved communities. In reality, Harrison was using these charitable missions to identify potential customers and create new addicts who would eventually pay premium prices for continued access to opioids. The free samples were carefully calculated to create physical dependence, ensuring a steady stream of paying customers once the charitable distributions ended. The operation's growth was explosive. Within 6 months, Harrison was stealing and distributing 20,000 pills monthly. Within a year, he was moving over 100,000 pills per month across Los Angeles and surrounding counties. The profits were staggering. Harrison was earning over $2 million monthly from his pharmaceutical empire. But this was still just the beginning of Harrison's ambitions. Over the next 3 years, Harrison's operation expanded to proportions that rivaled major drug cartels. He had systematically infiltrated 12 different hospitals throughout the Los Angeles metropolitan area, recruiting accomplices in each institution who could provide access to pharmaceutical supplies and assist with the creation of false medical records. His network included 45 active accomplices, comprising doctors, nurses, pharmacists, ambulance drivers, and administrative staff. Each accomplice had specific responsibilities and operated according to strict protocols that minimized their individual exposure while maximizing the overall efficiency of the operation. The scale of the theft was breathtaking. Harrison's organization was stealing and distributing over 500,000 prescription pills monthly, including OxyContin, Vicodin, Percocet, and fentanyl. The combined street value of these medications exceeded $3 million monthly, generating total revenues of over $50 million across the 3-year operation. Harrison had become the largest illegal opioid supplier on the West Coast, surpassing many established Mexican cartels in both volume and profitability. His operation was so sophisticated that it operated completely within the legitimate medical system, making detection by law enforcement extremely difficult. The organizational structure resembled a professional corporation more than a traditional criminal enterprise. Harrison maintained detailed financial records, employee performance evaluations, and strategic planning documents. He held regular meetings with his key lieutenants to review operations and plan expansion into new markets. The money laundering operation was equally sophisticated. Harrison created a network of shell companies and fake medical research foundations to process his drug profits through legitimate financial institutions. He established offshore bank accounts in Switzerland, the Cayman Islands, and Singapore to store the majority of his wealth beyond the reach of American law enforcement. Harrison invested heavily in real estate, purchasing properties throughout California that could serve as safe houses, storage facilities, and legitimate business fronts. He owned a medical equipment company that provided cover for purchasing ambulances and modifying them with hidden compartments. He also operated a pharmaceutical consulting firm that explained his frequent travels and contact with medical professionals throughout the region. The lifestyle that drug profits afforded Harrison was spectacular. He purchased an $8 million oceanfront mansion in Malibu with panoramic views of the Pacific Ocean. The property included a private beach, swimming pool, tennis court, and guest house. The mansion was decorated with expensive artwork and furnished with custom-made furniture from European designers. Harrison's garage housed a collection of 15 luxury and exotic automobiles, including 2 Ferraris, a Lamborghini, a Bentley, and several high-end Mercedes and BMW models. Each vehicle was meticulously maintained and represented hundreds of thousands of dollars in combined value. He purchased a 40-meter yacht that he kept at Marina del Rey, one of the most exclusive marinas in Southern California. The yacht was equipped with state-of-the-art navigation and communication equipment, luxury accommodations for 12 guests, and a professional crew of 4. Harrison used the yacht for entertaining business associates and potential accomplices, as well as for weekend trips to Catalina Island in Mexico. Harrison also owned a private Gulfstream jet that he used for travel throughout the United States and internationally. The jet allowed him to maintain his drug operation while appearing to pursue legitimate medical consulting opportunities in other cities. He frequently flew to medical conference and hospital consulting engagements that provided cover for his criminal activities. But Harrison was extremely careful about his spending patterns. Despite his enormous wealth, he maintained the outward appearance of a successful but not exceptionally wealthy surgeon. He continued living in his original Beverly Hills mansion most of the time, keeping the Malibu property as a weekend retreat. He drove modest vehicles to work and avoided displaying obvious signs of wealth that might attract attention from colleagues or law enforcement. The key to Harrison's success was his ability to compartmentalize his criminal activities from his legitimate medical practice. He continued performing surgeries at the highest level, maintaining his reputation as one of California's premier cardiac surgeons. His patients and colleagues had no idea that their respected physician was simultaneously operating one of the largest drug trafficking organizations in American history. But then everything started to unravel because Harrison made one fatal mistake that would expose his entire operation. The first serious threat to Harrison's empire emerged from an unexpected source: the tragic death of 19-year-old Jessica Martinez, a college student at UCLA who purchased what she believed were OxyContin pills from one of Harrison's street-level dealers. Jessica had been struggling with prescription drug addiction that began when she was prescribed Vicodin, following a wisdom tooth extraction during her freshman year. Like many college students, she found that opioids helped her manage both physical pain and the emotional stress of academic pressure. When her legitimate prescription ran out, Jessica began purchasing pills from dealers near the UCLA campus. The pills that killed Jessica had been contaminated with fentanyl, an extremely potent synthetic opioid that Harrison's suppliers had begun mixing with stolen pharmaceutical drugs to increase their potency and profitability. Jessica had no tolerance for fentanyl, and the contaminated pills delivered a fatal dose that stopped her breathing within minutes of consumption. Jessica's parents, Maria and Carlos Martinez, were devastated by their daughter's death. Maria was a high school teacher, and Carlos worked as an accountant for a small business. They were middle-class immigrants who had sacrificed enormously to send Jessica to UCLA, viewing her education as the pathway to the American dream. The Martinez family refused to accept that their daughter's death was simply a random tragedy. They hired a private investigator named David Chen, a former Los Angeles Police Department detective who specialized in drug-related cases. Chen began tracing the contaminated pills backward through the dealer network, attempting to identify their source. Chen's investigation revealed that the pills had passed through multiple levels of dealers before reaching Jessica. The trail led from the UCLA campus dealer to a mid-level distributor in Hollywood, then to a wholesale supplier who operated out of a medical equipment company in Glendale. Although Chen couldn't directly connect the drugs to Harrison at this stage, his investigation attracted the attention of local law enforcement agencies. Meanwhile, Drug Enforcement Administration agent Mark Thompson was conducting his own analysis of suspicious pharmaceutical distribution patterns throughout California. Thompson was a 15-year veteran of federal drug enforcement who had spent his career investigating prescription drug trafficking networks. Thompson had noticed that Los Angeles area hospitals were ordering substantially more opioid medications than similar institutions in other cities. The disparity was significant enough to warrant investigation, particularly given the growing national concern about prescription drug abuse and diversion from medical sources. Thompson began monitoring pharmacy records and physician prescribing patterns, looking for anomalies that might indicate illegal diversion of pharmaceutical drugs. He discovered that certain medications were being prescribed at unusually high rates by specific doctors, with Dr. Michael Harrison's name appearing frequently on these prescriptions. Initially, Harrison's reputation as a respected cardiac surgeon protected him from suspicion. Thompson's supervisors were reluctant to investigate a prominent physician without compelling evidence of wrongdoing. Cardiac surgery legitimately requires substantial pain management, and Harrison's prescribing patterns could potentially be explained by his surgical caseload. But Thompson was persistent. He began analyzing Harrison's patient records more carefully, cross-referencing them with hospital admission records and surgical schedules. This analysis revealed disturbing inconsistencies that suggested systematic fraud. Many of the patients receiving large opioid prescriptions from Harrison had no documented medical history prior to their supposed surgery dates. Some of these patients had social security numbers belonging to deceased individuals. Others had addresses that led to vacant lots or abandoned buildings. Thompson realized that Harrison was creating false patients to justify his opioid prescriptions, but he needed concrete evidence that would hold up in federal court. Building a case against a respected physician required absolute certainty and overwhelming proof of criminal activity. Operation Whitecoat was officially launched in January 2019. Thompson assembled a multi-agency task force, including DEA agents, IRS investigators, FBI financial crime specialists, and Los Angeles Police Department detectives. The task force was given unlimited resources and authority to investigate Harrison's activities comprehensively. The investigation began with comprehensive surveillance of Harrison's movements and communications. Federal agents monitored his phone calls, tracked his financial transactions, and observed his daily activities. They discovered that Harrison was meeting regularly with individuals who had no apparent connection to legitimate medical practice. The DEA also began monitoring the pharmacies that were filling Harrison's prescriptions, looking for patterns that might indicate illegal distribution. They discovered that many of these pharmacies were processing unusually large volumes of opioid prescriptions and were located in areas with high rates of drug abuse. But the breakthrough came when Thompson decided to infiltrate Harrison's network directly. He recruited Linda Green, a nurse who had been arrested for drug possession and was facing federal charges that could result in a 10-year prison sentence. Green agreed to cooperate with the DEA investigation in exchange for leniency in her own case. She was an experienced nurse with excellent credentials who could legitimately obtain employment at St. Vincent's Hospital and observe Harrison's activities from the inside. Green underwent extensive training in surveillance techniques and was equipped with sophisticated recording devices that were virtually undetectable. She spent weeks preparing for her undercover role, learning about Harrison's schedule, preferences, and management style. Within weeks, Green was documenting clear evidence of Harrison's criminal activities. She recorded conversations where Harrison discussed his distribution network with other accomplices. She photographed false medical records and prescription documents. She captured video footage of Harrison stealing medications from the hospital's pharmacy supplies. Green's most valuable intelligence concerned Harrison's plans for a major drug shipment to international buyers. Harrison had been contacted by representatives of a Mexican cartel who were interested in purchasing large quantities of pharmaceutical-grade opioids for distribution throughout Central America. The international deal represented an enormous opportunity for Harrison, with potential profits exceeding $2 million from a single transaction. But it also represented an enormous risk, as international drug trafficking carried much more severe federal penalties than domestic distribution. And then something happened that nobody expected. As the DEA investigation intensified, Harrison became increasingly paranoid about the security of his operation. He suspected that law enforcement was closing in, but he couldn't identify the specific threat or determine how much the authorities knew about his activities. Harrison's paranoia was well-founded. The DEA surveillance had documented extensive evidence of his drug trafficking operation, and federal prosecutors were preparing to seek indictments against Harrison and his key accomplices. But Harrison had no way of knowing how close the investigation had come to exposing him. In response to his growing anxiety, Harrison began implementing security measures that ultimately made his situation worse. He started eliminating what he considered weak links in his organization, individuals who might cooperate with law enforcement if they were arrested and pressured to provide information. James Rodriguez, the pharmacist who had helped Harrison falsify medication orders and inventory records, suddenly quit his job at St. Vincent's Hospital and disappeared from Los Angeles. Rodriguez told his colleagues that he had received a lucrative job offer from a pharmaceutical research company in Phoenix, but DEA investigators could find no record of such employment. Rodriguez's family received a brief phone call saying that he was safe and would be out of contact for several months while working on a classified project. But Rodriguez never contacted his family again, and his whereabouts remained unknown. Thompson suspected that Harrison had arranged for Rodriguez to be eliminated to prevent him from becoming a government witness. A surgical nurse named Patricia Williams, who had been asking inconvenient questions about medication discrepancies in the cardiology department, was involved in a suspicious automobile accident that left her hospitalized with serious injuries. Williams had been driving home from work when her car was struck by a hit-and-run driver who was never identified. The accident appeared to be random, but Thompson noted that Williams had been scheduled for an interview with hospital administrators about her concerns regarding pharmaceutical inventory management. The timing of the accident seemed too convenient to be coincidental. Harrison also began making preparations for a potential escape from the United States. He transferred substantial amounts of money to offshore bank accounts and established false identity documents that would allow him to relocate to countries without extradition treaties with America. But despite mounting pressure from the investigation, Harrison's greed ultimately overcame his caution. Instead of shutting down his operation and fleeing the country immediately, he decided to conduct one final major shipment that would provide him with enough money to live comfortably in exile for the rest of his life. The Mexican cartel representatives had offered Harrison $2.5 million for a massive shipment of pharmaceutical opioids, the largest single transaction in his criminal career. The deal would involve transporting 50,000 pills across the border, where they would be distributed throughout Mexico and Central America. Harrison calculated that the profits from this final deal, combined with the $50 million he had already accumulated over 3 years, would provide him with enough wealth to establish a new identity anywhere in the world. This fortune would allow him to relocate to Switzerland or another country with strong banking privacy laws. Harrison spent weeks planning the international shipment, coordinating with his accomplices and arranging transportation through his network of modified ambulances. He planned to use the profits to relocate to Zurich, where he had already purchased an apartment and established bank accounts under a false name. But Thompson's surveillance team was monitoring Harrison's communications through court-authorized wiretaps. They knew about the planned international shipment and were prepared to intercept it before it could leave the United States. The DEA coordinated with Mexican law enforcement authorities to ensure that Harrison's cartel contacts were also under surveillance. The international scope of the operation allowed federal prosecutors to pursue additional charges that carried life imprisonment without the possibility of parole. On March 14, 2019, Harrison arrived at St. Vincent's Hospital to begin final preparations for what he believed would be his last operation before retiring from the drug business. He had spent months coordinating every detail of the shipment, from the acquisition of the medications to the transportation arrangements and the transfer of money to offshore accounts. The ambulance designated for the operation had been specially modified by Tommy Vasquez with the most sophisticated hidden compartments that Harrison's organization had ever constructed. These compartments were built into the vehicle's frame and were virtually undetectable without completely dismantling the ambulance. Harrison personally supervised the loading of the 50,000 pills, ensuring that each compartment was properly sealed and that the ambulance appeared completely normal from the outside. He was confident that even if the vehicle was stopped by police, the hidden drugs would not be discovered during a routine inspection. The loading process took over 3 hours, with Harrison and his accomplices working carefully to ensure that the weight distribution appeared normal and that no external signs indicated the presence of the hidden compartments. Each pill was counted and documented to ensure accuracy for the international buyers. As the ambulance prepared to leave the hospital garage at 3:47 a.m., Harrison felt a mixture of excitement and relief. This final shipment would complete his transformation from a debt-ridden surgeon to a wealthy international fugitive. Within hours, he would be on his private jet heading toward a new life in Europe. But DEA agents had been monitoring the hospital for weeks, and they were already in position to intercept the shipment. Agent Thompson had coordinated with local police to establish roadblocks on all major routes leading away from St. Vincent's Hospital. Helicopter surveillance was tracking the ambulance from the moment it left the building. Thompson had obtained federal warrants that authorized the search and seizure of the ambulance and the arrest of all occupants. The warrants were based on months of surveillance evidence and testimony from Linda Green, the undercover nurse who had documented Harrison's criminal activities from inside the hospital. At 3:52 a.m., the ambulance was stopped at the first traffic light outside the hospital. Thompson approached the vehicle with his weapon drawn, while other agents surrounded the ambulance to prevent any escape attempt. Harrison watched in horror as armed federal agents took control of the situation he had planned so carefully. The search of the ambulance revealed not only the 50,000 pills hidden in the secret compartments, but also detailed records of Harrison's entire distribution network. Federal agents found lists of accomplices, financial records, and communication logs that provided a comprehensive picture of the criminal organization. The subsequent federal investigation revealed the true scope of Harrison's empire and its impact on communities throughout the West Coast. Federal agents seized over $15 million in cash from Harrison's various bank accounts, both domestic and international, representing a significant portion of the estimated $50 million that had flowed through his operation. They confiscated his Malibu mansion, yacht, automobile collection, and private jet as proceeds from drug trafficking. More importantly, the investigation exposed systemic weaknesses in hospital security and pharmaceutical distribution systems that had allowed Harrison's operation to flourish undetected for 3 years. The case led to significant reforms in how medical institutions monitor and control narcotic medications. Sarah Connolly, Tommy Vasquez, and the other accomplices were arrested as part of the broader federal investigation. Faced with overwhelming evidence of their participation in the drug trafficking scheme, most of Harrison's accomplices agreed to cooperate with federal prosecutors in exchange for reduced sentences. The trial of Dr. Michael Harrison became a national media sensation, highlighting the growing problem of prescription drug abuse and the role of medical professionals in fueling the opioid crisis that was devastating communities across America. Harrison was ultimately sentenced to life imprisonment without the possibility of parole and ordered to pay $50 million in restitution to victims of the opioid crisis. His medical license was permanently revoked, and he was banned from any involvement in healthcare or pharmaceutical activities. Wait, hold up. If this story seemed crazy to you, then you don't know the most interesting part yet. Every day on our channel, new investigations come out about people who deceived the system, built empires, and lost everything because of one fatal mistake. Write in the comments the city you're watching from. Hit the like button and subscribe so you don't miss the next story. It will be even more incredible, I promise. And remember, sometimes the most dangerous criminals wear white coats.